Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special guest, James Dulin. James, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. I was excited that you got a hold of me on Instagram. I had actually had you in my back pocket, anyways, um, just with book three coming out and stuff like
Yeah,
that. Yeah, so I loved your book two cover. I have to say, I just thought it was
thank
super
you.
cool. Book one too. I think I found you on Twitter, and
Yeah.
it just came up. And I was like, I love thieves, so sold. And I bought that one right away. Yeah, and I love just kind of like the progression. I was gonna originally be an illustrator
Oh
in
yeah.
college. So yeah, there's just certain books, like the covers, and then I'll go and flip right to the blurb. And there's just sometimes like stuff just speaks to me. So I've been pretty good, I feel like the last couple of years, with picking my flavor.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to have you on and get to ask you some questions today. So
I'm excited for it.
well, we'll start right there with that first one. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
Well, I really started out as a poet. So I
Oh,
wrote
cool.
poetry for the majority of my writing career, if you can call it that. I started out in college writing a lot of poetry. I started doing slam poetry and poetry competitions, and I would submit to online magazines and did a lot of that. But I always gravitated towards reading fiction and genre fiction a lot. Uh, but I never thought I could write a book. I just thought like that's too much. I can write this one poem that's less than a page. That was easier.
Yeah.
And then I just decided, hell, I'm gonna try it. And so I sat down, I wrote No Heart for a Thief, and it was awful. The first draft was just hor I didn't know conventions, and like I hadn't thought about books in terms of like, okay, how am I gonna design this POV? How am I gonna make sure that it's clear and all that. I just had words on a page, but I had
Yeah.
enough that I could edit it several times to come up with what I think is a pretty good book, No Heart for a Thief. And that released last January. So I've only been an indie author for a little over a year now. I have two novels out and a novella. And so that was, it's been good. It's been great being a part of this community. It has been, I'm sure a lot of people say this, a whirlwind. Everything since you release your first book becomes chaotic because now you're no longer just writing, you're doing everything you can to try to make
Yeah.
that book get into other people's hands, in addition to trying to find time to write.
Which it's a lot.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, yeah, like so like Herman Stewart Angle, so we just did our crossover episode, we actually released today.
Okay.
And he had actually asked me that. He's like, "Why'd you start your podcast?" And I was like, "Well, it was just so hard for, for certain people like you and me, right, to get on a certain podcast." And I have people, I'm booked out for 2 years at this point. I'm hoping I can, start to do some more stuff, but it's
Yeah.
just like my wife, she's like, "You want to help everybody all the time." And I'm like, but I do though, because in my mind, because it's so hard to get the
It is.
podcast out. And I have like 1,200 people in our Facebook group right now, and it's still hard to just get everybody's, stuff seen and, links out there, views, stuff like that. And I feel like algorithms just hurt you. And
Yeah.
it's really hard, TikTok used to be a lot better. It's gone through several different algorithms in the last really 3 or 4 years. Which I used to post random stuff. It'd be like 750. Book Talk was awesome, and now I feel like again you're at that 200 cap every time. Which I look at it differently now. Like if I could share your books, which I do for everybody, especially when we've released or we've interviewed. So I'll be
Yeah.
doing that this week for your books. Even if I can get each time though, 200 people, maybe, that'd be like 600 people at least get eyes on your work. So I look at it differently now,
Yeah.
but it is still really hard, to convert those to sales. So I feel like a lot of
Yeah.
people, they just don't realize how much we actually do. So
It's a slow trek. I mean, if there are some people that just break out, and those are the ones you all hear about. So you hear the Ryan Cahill story all the time.
yeah,
But most of us are not in that situation. And I would say it's probably harder now than it was 2.5 years ago when Ryan Cahill started to release because now you're fighting with AI, you're fighting with different forms of algorithm, you're fighting with the uh the battles within different social media platforms about
Yep.
what things are changing, what's going to get banned next week, what's going
Yep.
to fall apart with somebody buying a new platform.
Yep.
And so there's just a lot of room to grow, but it's an uphill battle.
Yeah, yeah. I had talked to a few authors. They're like, we should start our own like thing, just for writers, and
Yep.
readers. And I'm like, God, that just sounds like our own app. I was like, that just sounds amazing. Because I feel like Twitter was really good right during the pandemic and right after. I mean, I used to see people all the time. I mean, obviously some people have left, but I know for a fact that there's still people on there who I've
Oh yeah.
never seen ever again on the algorithm, particularly, once it became X or whatever. But yeah, like when Ryan first came out, I mean, it was pop it. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
You had traditional indie, you had, people that had 100 books, people had one book, people were thinking about writing, and everybody was just mixing. I call that like it was like a renaissance, really.
Hmm.
Writing just in general, and that energy coming from the pandemic was, the pandemic sucked and everything, but that energy I feel like coming into creatives, particularly sharing in the writing community and artists on Twitter, was just absolutely amazing. And great, authors and people, popping up like Ryan. And it just completely, in my opinion, changed the industry. So I think it's a shame that,
Yeah.
now we're fighting technology. Because now they want you to pay, right, for getting in the algorithms. So, and even then, there's no guarantee. So, yeah,
Yeah, it's all about the luck of catching the wave. And I
it
think
really
some
is.
people, and and don't get me wrong, the people that have caught the wave are talented and they write
Oh, they
great
deserve it.
books.
Totally. Yep.
They deserve it. But there's also the element of luck and making the timing right with the right type of book, with the right title and the right cover. Like there is this weird, extremely complicated Venn diagram that you have to hit right in the middle of
Yep.
to really soar like that.
Yep.
Um, and I've kind of understood now that unfortunately that's not going to be me. I've definitely sold a lot of copies, a lot more copies than I thought I would in my first year, but I'm coming to understand that this is going to be a longer term journey for me, that it's going
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
take more than the first series. It's going to maybe take more than the second series and thereafter. But I'm in this for the long haul. And so it's just going to take me kind of working and traipsing up that hill until I have enough readers that are really interested in my next book
Yeah.
and really want to look at my backlog and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to take time, but that it's hard because a lot of people are looking to hit that magic bullet, and it's very, very rare.
Yep. No, totally. Well, people ask me all the time, like I had another podcast, like how many views you get per thing? I go, I'm like, I used to get like, on all the platforms, maybe like 100 to 250, and now I'm like stretching for 50 to 60. I have people that are going through my entire backlog now on any of the platforms. So I know eventually that'll catch up to me, but I don't do it for views. I do it so that people,
Yeah,
can see your book. If you get 50 people, right? And I figure if I can get you 10 people that buy your book, but if I can get you 5 fans for life, you
yeah,
know what I mean? Like whatever you write from now till the end of Kingdom Come or whatever, like that was mission accomplished, and I think that as a writer, myself, I'm like, my wife asks me this all the time. I'm like, people ask me, they're like, why haven't you published this? You have this and that. I'm like, I'm just being patient, because I want to make sure I ride that wave accordingly, and I don't want
mhm,
to suck at surfing, if that makes sense.
yeah,
And then fall on my face, then have to try and ride another wave. I want to be, ready when that wave comes. So even if I have to, have a bunch of stuff that I can fix or finish the next couple years. But yeah, it is a lot more difficult than people say. But I do agree with you. You look at someone like JCM Byrne. I just finished Wistful Ascending. Oh my God, like it was such a great book. I cannot wait to read book two and
yeah,
and three, and he's got four on the way, and it was just so much fun. But you look at somebody like that, and I'm like, I totally think, he needs to sell more copies. And I know people that would like that book, and love that book like I did, and yeah, there's just so many great people out there. It's just, I feel like, yeah, it's hard. And people ask me, why do you do this? And why you spend all this time on this and that? And I'm like, well, to be honest, it's time where I wasn't going to be writing anyway, where it's my free time. And, it's just nice to get to help people and, try and help push them along on the wave, so to speak, and
yeah.
try and go that way. But yeah, it's very
And
hard.
if you're looking to get into indie author, being an indie author for like the money, you have you
It's
have
like going into
chosen
teaching
poorly.
for the money. I had a kid ask me the other day, they're like, "Why'd you start doing this?" And I was like, totally like, I was getting ready for a lesson. I go, "For the money," and then they're all juniors, they're just great kids, and they all just turn and they're like staring at me. One girl's mouth was agape, and I'm like, "No, I'm just kidding." It's like it was just so funny. And then somebody's like, "Yeah, but he writes books," and I was just like, "Oh God, if they only knew," you know. Yeah, but totally. I think I always look at this as going back to what you're saying. I think of it as like a 10-year career personally. I look at and that's like podcasting. I'm probably not going to do too well. Honestly, the statistics show for this podcast till year 5, or season
Okay.
5. So I try to pump out a lot of stuff, and I would have been on season 5 already, in my 2.5 years right now. But my wife, her pregnancy in general, she was just sick all the time and stuff. So I was taking care of her. So I got held up, and
So
my
you're
son was
blaming the
born.
wife?
No, no, no. I blame myself. Should have been a better husband. Should have been a better father. But yeah, just you know how it is. Like stuff just happens.
Yeah. No, I
Um,
get it.
yeah, and the pandemic messed with a lot of. I had extra time set aside and messed with a lot of publishing dates.
Yeah.
So I would have had a whole. I would already be halfway done with season 4 already, but even though despite life, but unfortunately, so many people had to cancel and reschedule. And I have people
Yeah.
that will be in season 5 that should have been in end of season 2 and beginning of this one. So I had to go through the whole process again, which now it's nice. I have people ask me all the time, like yourself. So it's really nice. But yeah, it's just running out of time now. And then but I always think like writing's the same, right? People always ask me like, when do you expect to do this? I'm like year 10.
Yeah.
Like this year in September, I'll release definitely my first novella, and I consider that the start of year 10. And whatever I accomplish, in that time would just be icing on the cake, and I
Yeah.
feel like you can always move those mile markers and stuff. But I consider the same as podcasting. But I do agree with you. If you want to get in the indie publishing for the money, that's not the thing.
No.
But yeah, I like just hanging out with everybody, and I just want people to read the
Yeah.
ideas that are in my head and stuff. And I love reading, people's books and talking about their writing, which leads me, to some of our next questions here.
Of course.
That
Yeah.
was a great little segue there. I like the indie talk. That was awesome. So what genres do you currently write in, and why?
So I currently write fantasy. I definitely have some thoughts about science fiction books,
Oh, that's
but
cool.
right now I'm writing fantasy. So my Malitu series is my first series, two novels, one novella out. And they are high fantasy. I wouldn't necessarily say epic fantasy because they're much more intimate books. There's the world is epic. There's a lot of epic things happening around them, but the characters themselves and the story itself is really honed in on the life experience of a few characters. And so it's much more of an intimate setting. And they um, basically their continent has been colonized, and so it's the story of a young man who's trying to figure out how to survive this. Does he fight it? Does he just try to live? Does he try to save those around him, or does he stay out of the way? Trying to understand those rough questions about how to live a life when everything that makes you and your people is being stripped away. And so it's told in two parts. It's told as the story of him in this younger form, and he's trying to come of age. He's learning about his magic. He's learning about the world, and everything that's harsh in it. And then it's told in the future where he is kind of jaded by everything that has happened to him, everything that he's done. And he stumbles upon this young girl who is in a very similar position to what he used to be in. And so he's telling her the story of his life to try to keep her from making the same mistakes as he sees them. And so you have these two stories that kind of run parallel, and they're juxtapositions of one another, trying to show what colonization looks like differently in different generations.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love the stories. I think they're really interesting to focus on people without power when so many fantasy books are focused on the king or the
Yeah, yeah.
warlord or uh, the chosen one, this, that, the other. Nobody's hidden royalty in here. Nobody's going to find a crown at the end. It's really focused on some people who are stuck in a shitty situation and are trying to figure the best way out. And at times it's violent, at times it's sad, at times it's just ridiculous and ugly and all those different kinds of things. But at the heart of it is people trying to connect with one another and trying to find a way through as with as little damage to them as possible.
Mm. No, I totally get that. I totally get that last part you're saying. I have some characters that um well, I just want to plug again with your podcast, which was awesome. With Herman Surango over at the greatest podcast in the multiverse.
Yeah,
I actually listened to that one twice. I really enjoyed a lot of the questions that he asked you, just about like how you're coming up with the writing process, for your characters, your world. So I do want to just kind of piggyback off that a little bit, because I just want
yeah,
you to share
definitely.
with our audience here, so that people can go and check out that interview as well. But I'm curious of how you really came up with this idea, because when you were explaining on his podcast, I thought, God, it gave me so many ideas. So I had to then, like 2 days after that, listen to it again. Because you really made me kind of rethink a little bit with cultural diffusion, some of the things I'm doing in my own writing to, make it feel a little bit more real. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, how'd you come up with this idea of going from the colonized, and kind of building their world, and their viewpoint?
So uh, the people really stemmed out of the magic system for me. Um, and the magic system originated with one thought that I was having when I was walking my dog. I really enjoy the idea of a sin eater, somebody who
Ooh.
consumes the sin of another and takes it into themselves. And just the quick thought of being, what if instead of sin it was magic? What if somebody consumed magic from somebody else? And that kind of birthed the idea of a spirit thief, this person that could steal magic from one another. And that started this idea of a magic system. Well, what kind of magic are they stealing? All of that. And then that formed into this elemental based system. But I didn't want it overpowered. I didn't want
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you to be able to just throw mountains at each other. This People have compared this to Avatar: The Last Airbender because it's an elemental magic system, it's spiritual based, but you can't whip fire around, you can't whip water around, you can't send a tornado at somebody in the same kind of way. This is really just being able to manipulate the world around you to a certain degree. So you can put more energy into a fire. You can move the water in a way that it would traditionally move, like you can pull rain from the clouds.
Oh, that's cool.
Um, and so it's smaller magic. And I wanted it to be that way because I didn't want it to be designed as a weapon. I didn't want this magic to be thought of as a weapon. It's more of a part of their culture. It's a part of
Oh,
who
that's
they
cool.
are. And so you have people that can manipulate plant life. That came into their culture as like this is an honored position of somebody who's able to help feed and raise medicinal plants and things like that to help people. You have people that can move the earth, but that's really designed to help people have shelter and do this kind of thing. So it's more of this small magic that was designed to be a part of a culture, a part of people's everyday lives. And then it got warped when somebody decided, let's try to colonize them.
Mm,
So war changes the way their magic was used.
interesting.
Um, and so, I've studied a lot of different kinds of colonization, a lot of different kinds of oppressive movements, and I don't want to mirror any of them in like a one-to-one relationship. This isn't about Native Americans. This isn't about, I've had a lot of people say this reminds me of this. Probably does because a lot of oppression is very similar.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, totally.
this isn't about the colonization of Africa or the oppression in India. This isn't about South America. This has elements of a lot of that. But what I wanted to focus on was the way that um, that culture is manipulated, assimilated, and snuffed out in different ways. So books are burned. People are trying to be re-educated, the next generation. There are different ways that this culture is tried to snuff out. And it lives because stories are so important to the main characters, are important to the culture of the indigenous people. And so they try to keep their stories alive. Um, and that's a lot of where Kalo, my main character, came from, is stories are so important to his people, but his ability to steal magic is a villain in most of the stories. And
Oh,
so
interesting.
how does he relate to his own people when the stories he's grown up learning and being told are him? He becomes the villain of those stories when he finds out he has this magic.
Mm.
So there's a lot of trying to understand himself and his people as a part of these stories, but also how to live his life in the present and detach from those stories in a way, and how to make those marry. Um, I feel like I've just rambled on a lot because
No,
sometimes
it's just
it all
no,
just
it's
kind
just
of
I
flows.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think it makes total sense. I just kind of wanted, like I said, to recap that
Yeah,
because I had to listen to it a couple times when you and Herman were talking about it because I'm always trying to explain to people, there's just so many things being a history teacher, and studying sociology and stuff like that, right? Where some people are like, well, that's I think that's the one thing that I like, is I can really easily use what I've already learned, right? Like you're saying, um, but and again, I had somebody the other day, they're like, well, I actually referenced your guys' podcast. They said, well, how does a writer, uh, you know, take something real world, but then make it unique and then implement into their writing? And I was like, just go listen to this podcast. Because that was one of the most recent ones I
yeah,
had listened to, and it was still on my mind. Um, and then they came back to me like, oh my gosh, like that makes total sense to me. Like I know what to do now. So I think as a teacher, sometimes I like those tangible evidences,
yeah,
which is why I like podcasts. And because that, like, when, I use this also as a learning platform for myself too, not just, for other people. Because yeah, when you were saying that with Herman, I was just like, it just was blowing my mind. I had like four different countries that I was writing for, just like a fun, I call it a fantasy, just like a fun dark
yeah,
fantasy, based off of a D&D campaign. I just need a break from some of my other stuff. And it's just going to be fun D&D. Like I don't explain the
yeah,
magic system, it's just like they do really cool
yeah,
stuff, and if you play D&D, it's whatever. But I just couldn't help after I listened to you guys, and you explain how you did that with your world building, where I changed like four different countries, and when I got done, my buddy was like, "Oh my God, like that's going to be really cool," and it changed things for the entire continent and for the entire series, and it made things for me lock in place. So I just wanted you to talk about it again because I think that it's just such a tangible way, like you said, right? It could resemble a lot of different,
yeah,
ways that people are oppressed. But again, taking those commonalities, I think, it just makes your world feel that much, heavier. And I really like what you're talking about too, where your main character, when he has those powers, where now he's kind of the villain in his own people's stories. That adds a whole nother onion to the layer. Um, or layer of the onion, where I think it's like it just feels so much more real,
yeah.
and makes your characters have a lot more depth. So I just want to make sure that we had kind of reiterated that because I just thought it was a really great explanation, and Herman asked you a lot of really good subset questions with that one. So super, super cool.
And it was a fun podcast with Herman. I think there, and it's a tricky thing when you're talking about oppression and things that mirror the real world. There are
Yep.
a lot of commonalities that are are in a lot of these stories. Um, when you start to tell other people's stories for them, you start to cross a little bit of a line in my
Yeah, yeah,
point of view. So it was important to me to really make this different enough, but also I wanted to talk about colonization and in my view, it's a conversation about whiteness. It's a conversation about the assimilation of culture in order to take power from one group and put it in another group's position.
yep.
And so I wanted to have that conversation, and I wanted to have it in a real and honest way. But for me, it was really important. I used sensitivity readers. I wanted to make sure that this was an honest story that was told in a way that wasn't negatively impacting groups that
Totally.
uh, I wanted to talk about oppression, but I didn't want to further oppress or hurt anybody who might be affected by some of those similar stories.
Yep.
Um, so it's a difficult balance, but you see that if you study history, there's a lot of commonality of what different groups of people have done to people over the past, hundreds of thousands of years, but let's focus the last thousand or a few thousand years. Um, you know, Groups have done this to each other again and again and again, and it's always in the service of power. It's always in the service of conquest. And so it's a tricky line to walk, but I think you can do it if you're doing it earnestly. And if you're writing a story for a purpose and you want to include those themes for a purpose, when it's just window dressing, I think it becomes just an issue.
Yep.
Um, yeah.
I think window dressing is actually a really great way to put it. Personally, I want to do this like paladin thing, right? But like there's a lot of machinations. That's gonna be one of my epic fantasies.
Mhm.
But I guess my like high fantasy, like you were saying, but I want to kind of show like parallels, between countries like the United States, or other ones, who have found themselves on the side of right or good. I would say World War II, right? On ending the Holocaust, things like that, and oppression. But then maybe those things dilapidated over time, in order to do various things. And again, it's not just the U.S. is a good example, I think, currently, because after World War II. But my friend was like, "Oh, this is really cool," with like what I had subset. He's like, "Oh, it could be the Roman Empire, it could be this, it could be that." I'm like, "Yeah, true."
Yeah.
So, but the same thing. I want to like use history to and fantasy in a way to teach people that I always think of that Batman, where it's like if you're the hero, you live long enough to see yourself become the villain sort of thing.
Yeah.
And to be careful, so my paladins are going to be like these right and might, but then because of that right and might and that they defeated evil, they start to slowly over time to eradicate evil, like the totally blanking Wheel of Time, the, the guys that are in the white armor. I
Um,
just was reading it.
I've not read The Wheel of Time. I'm
Oh, that's
trying
right. I'll just get review bound on this one. It's not Jay's fault. It's mine. But anyways, the White Cloaks. Sorry, the White Cloaks.
White Cloaks, yes.
Yeah, like they're trying to do the right thing, but sometimes almost too much, and kind of like that light versus dark Jedi thing, where sometimes there's gray areas. So, but I
Yeah.
agree with you. Just like saying like or just doing the one thing, right? Some people might just consider it wagging your finger or whatever at them, but I feel like I've been trying to take time to do what you did. We're really interweaving a bunch of different eras together, go with those commonalities, and come up with something unique.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, but like that's where I was just kept listening to your guys' podcast, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was like, I totally get this, I get that. But yeah, it was like a really good writing lesson, I feel like. So I got
I
kind
have
of
to go
bummed.
listen to that podcast again. I don't even know what I said.
It was really good. Yeah, but it was really good. I had to actually keep trying to tell people to go to that one and a few others. Herman's just in general, but a few
Yeah.
questions. I'm like, man, so I've been trying to up my question game quite a bit after listening to him and Adrian and MJ recently over and over again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that it's just good though, because again, I always tell people I had a lot of newer authors get a hold of me recently in the podcast group to like, what should I do to get better? I'm like, I'm a coach. So I used to tell kids, you want to get better at volleyball, you watch volleyball, you listen to people talk about volleyball, and you have
Yeah.
to like immerse yourself, I think. And I think podcasts are a great way to do it. I learn stuff all the time from listening, to whoever. Or, I did a couple of joint YouTube channel stuff. People, we just got together and talked about tabletop games. Adam, Outer Bridge is one. We'll have that coming really soon, a couple weeks. It was just like a cool combo. But I feel like, yeah, it's my wife. She's always like, you always write better after having an interview. And I'm like, well, because you got to talk to somebody, and kind of get the juices flowing, so to
Yeah.
speak. So, but yeah, I really liked your answers with that interview, though, because again, it really got me thinking and it got my wheels turning. So I do have to give you credit, though, for my new fantasy because some of the different things I did. I don't want to give it away, so I'll message you
No,
privately
no,
later.
you're good.
But I'm pretty excited to let you know a couple of things that your guys has talked, and I already kind of shared a few with Herman privately that kind of it kind of birthed quite a few cool things. So
That's
I
really
think
cool.
that we can help each other out. So
And speaking of that, I will listen to and watch D&D live plays and then hear people
yeah, yeah,
talk
yeah.
about live plays. And I actually have never played D&D myself. It's something
Mhm.
that I've wanted to do and I've just never had the space or the time. Um, but I'll listen to DMs talk about how they craft story. And it's really interesting to think about that in terms of how you are as an author with your
Totally.
characters almost being your players. Um, like Brendan Lee Mulligan talking about
Ooh,
um, plot is
yep.
really interesting. He was having a conversation with Matt Mercer and Abria Iyengar,
Oh,
and
cool.
he was talking about the players essentially have a goal. And they're trying to go to that goal. And the quickest path between them and their goal is a straight line. Your job as a GM is not necessarily to block them from their goal. It is to create more terrain between them and their goal. So they're still trying to head towards it as quickly as possible, but you give them twists and turns that inhibit them from going in a straight line. And so he put it as like water flowing down a mountain. It will try to flow in a single line, but rocks and things get in its way. So it becomes a stream. If it was a straight line, it would be boring. But this stream becomes more interesting because it has to weave through things, it has to go around obstacles, it has to manipulate, it has to deal with the manipulations of the earth. And so, in a way, you are what is manipulating the earth for the stream. And so I thought about this in terms of dialogue. Like, I've read so much dialogue that's like just one question, one person asking a bunch of questions of another to try to get exposition out. It's boring. You don't want to read that.
Yeah.
But if you view these two characters as both having goals, trying to run to those goals, and but they're getting in each other's way with the conversation becoming an obstacle, then there are tangents. There are ways that they pick at each other. There are ways that they go around each other and try to manipulate the conversation. And it becomes really interesting then. Then that dialogue is fun to read. You can still talk about the exposition that you needed to get in there, but now it's actually interesting to read because one isn't just serving as, and can you tell me more? But they're actually engaging and saying, no, I don't like that, or just being an asshole and bantering. Like they're the obstacle for that person to say what they want to say. And so sometimes I'll take inspiration from that or just reading amazing authors. But it's yeah, like what you're saying, it's really important that you draw inspiration from those places because there are people who have been doing it much better and much longer than I have. So why wouldn't I take a few pointers?
No, totally. Well, I think of Malazan, Book of the Fallen, and Tehol and Bug, and talk about banter. Like, and there's other characters too. There's so many characters with great relationships in there, but they're different. There's also
Yeah,
different types of banter. But two guys just like Tehol and Bug, just being a-holes to each other, but showing that because they're always doing that and they're never serious, even when they're talking about something serious, it shows the level and depth, um, of their friendship and
yeah,
relationship. And they're total bros, and you can tell, and um, yeah, and it was just so much fun to read those characters. Anytime though that relationship popped up, I mean, I flew through Malazan. And there's a couple others, and my buddy and I are like, my best friend and I are like, man, like just take him and just look at some different relationships and the dialogue, which is so much better. There were other things that maybe you can get rid of, whatever, but like he writes dialogue so well, and
yeah,
even the banter between different characters, like you and me, or me and my friend, other friend would be totally different, right?
mhm,
But yeah, it was just so good. So I learned a lot of dialogue writing from just reading, like, just some of his different relationships. So I totally agree. Yeah, it was super cool. I just have to say, because you actually just reminded me, my friend got me the Random Encounter book, which I have here somewhere, but my son just like move all my books around. But they are D&D books, and this one
Okay.
is the Ultimate RPG Character Backstory Guide. And these are really cool. I got this one for like $6. The other one I got on sale recently. Is I do DM, I run games in my own fantasy world to kind of run stories and characters and different
Okay.
ideas by people, by my group and stuff. And I've gotten a lot of good writing ideas from our sessions because they'll come up with something and then I'll change it, write a note, and I'll be like, oh, that's really good, for because they are the characters.
Hmm.
But I like these guides because you go through and if you're stuck on a character, I've done this with the character sheet too. I've created a character sheet, for different characters. So I just wanted to kind of piggyback off that because I'm writing so many different genres and stories that sometimes it's hard to come up with a new third or secondary character and why they're doing something. And I just thought like it's cool because you go in here and you just roll and then it tells you literally. And if you don't like that thing, the reason that, James writes or whatever, you just roll for another one, until those things fit. So I definitely think that, they're really good tools out there for people that if you can't just sit here and think and write,
Yeah.
you can use different things like the D&D setup. You can go and use the free guides online and stuff like that. Or like you said, right, listen to some of these, YouTubers. Chris Perkins is an amazing, like Matthew Mercer, but a lot of people forget about Chris Perkins. And Chris Perkins, is just a little bit different with how he tells a story and how he sets up games. But oh my goodness, like I think Critical Role kind of overshadowed Dice Camera Action a bit. And Chris Perkins is like a storytelling genius and guru,
Yeah.
just like Matt. So I would encourage people to go and check out him as well. He does some one shots and stuff, and he just comes up with some great ideas. But yeah, definitely some cool things. That's why my friend, he's like, "Oh, you writing it? You're writing again?" I'm writing again, but you can do so many different things, not just genres, there's just so
Yeah.
many tools and it's not I'm never doing the same thing, over and over and over again. So I think it makes it more exciting. Well, that was cool. I'll have to check out find that talk you were
It
discussing
was
because
some
that sounds
roundtable talk about because both Abria and Brennan GM'd in is it Exandria, right?
I think so. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And so they had a roundtable GM talk about that. Um, Calamity was my first time watching a live play, and it was
Oh,
a
gotcha.
hell of a live play to start with.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, that's
So
funny. I love those. I'll go back to like I think on Critical Role, I think I'm only in like like midway through season two. It's just hard when they're like 2 hour long episodes with a kid.
yes. Yeah.
But I'll go through them like on long drives and stuff like that. So I'll have to go back through. But yeah, I definitely agree with you that those are a good source too. I always get just amazing ideas from them. But yeah, that's a good idea. I'm gonna have to find that. So in terms of world building, I was just curious, what were your most important steps? So you talked a little bit, about this idea with the magic system. Were
Mhm.
you, and then you had some other ideas. I was just kind of curious, like in what order, like how did you put that recipe together, to give us such a great world there?
I mean, I think it did start with this idea of the magic system and how it played into culture. Um, but I don't know if you've ever read The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Diaz.
No, but I started actually a couple years ago, and I for some reason I did not finish. I'm not sure why.
Gotcha.
Probably got busy.
Um,
I
but
think
that
it was in
book
my
has
master's.
these really cool footnotes that are basically going through Dominican Republic history and things that are necessary for the story. Um, but they're very voicey. They're told from the voice of the narrator, and so they can be bantery or sarcastic and that. Um, and so they're really fun to read. I ended up doing that in my book, the first couple of drafts, because I was trying to add in so many different stories and things about the world. Um, it ended up not working very well because I got a lot of feedback that people were getting pulled out of the story by these uh
Got it. There
Hey.
we go. I've had like the tech week from just like hell doesn't even describe it. Like
Yeah.
I own my website name, right? And it's trying to tell me on WordPress that somebody else owns it. I'm like, no, that's me. And like this is the email I bought it with. Anyways, like you were saying about that book, sorry.
Um, I don't know where I left off.
I actually I just said that I actually started to read it, but I actually totally forgot that I started to read
Okay.
that book. I must have lost it in Goodreads or something, so I have to go back.
Yeah.
But yeah, you were just mentioning that one and kind of like
Yeah.
how it played into world building for you.
So in that book, Juno Diaz writes a bunch of footnotes that dig into history of the Dominican Republic or just different historical facts or cultural facts relating to being Dominican. And they're all told with the narrative voice of the narrator in mind. So they're sarcastic and they're witty and they're bantery and they're fun to read. I did that with my first couple of drafts of No Heart for a Thief.
Oh, that's
Became
cool.
way too complex, and I was told by some beta readers like it just pulls me out of the story because I feel like I
Mm,
have to read them, even though they're just side notes. So I had a lot of stories that I wrote about Ania and about its history and how things came to be and different myths, but also different historical things that happened, like the Hundred Turn War that happened uh, several hundred years ago in Aenean's history, that is actually covered in my novella.
mm,
Um, and so that really helped me develop the world building because I was just playing with a lot of facts and a lot of things that I was making up along the way. Um, and then it helped me understand how they would relate to this foreign power coming in,
mm,
how they would react and respond to all of the different things that were happening in their world. So, for instance, the Hundred Turn War, it's basically a misnomer. It was several different wars that happened with several of the different countries on the continent, and there was infighting and years of peace between some, but throughout this hundred years, 100 turns in the book, um, there was always some kind of fighting happening.
mm,
And since then, it's been 200 years. And this group of strangers lands on the southern shore. And by now, Ania's like preaching peace. It's trying to get back over of its bloody history, its infighters, its hard borders between the continent and between the countries. And so that really informed how they related to this group just showing up on their shores. And then it also informed who ended up fighting against them once they started trying to claim territory in India. And so just none of that is in the book in terms of the details of the Hundred Turn War and what happened. But the fact that I knew that this war or these wars had happened, they'd created these divisions, helped inform how this culture responded to that. And so I think that really helped is just knowing this history and knowing this environment and knowing the countries that are involved. Um, and then also just kind of giving them some space um, to have like these different stories that they've told as myths impact them. So the myths are around stealing magic. It's all about all magic is connected to one spirit on the other side of the spiritual plane. And so different people can hear different spirits and pull on that magic. The spirit thief is this interesting spirit that has been demonized for hundreds of years in their stories. And, you know, there's no spirit that's actually called the thief. There's just what she's become known as because of all these myths and these stories that have twisted
oh, cool.
her history. And so it's interesting to think about she has these connections to all these people that have her gift in the living world and how that would affect her given that she's been demonized, her people have been exiled and killed, or all these awful things have happened to the people that she's touched with and given her gift to. How would that affect a spiritual deity? How would that in turn affect what goes on with her people in the real world? And what would happen even as her people are colonized? What kind of beliefs would they hold on to after they're colonized? Those really strong, hateful beliefs, those might still linger. And so it's a lot of telling myself stories about the world I'm creating and then finding the ways to drop hints along the way. Because I know it
Yeah.
would be boring if I just wrote a history book on Ania,
I
but
would read that.
well, you teach history, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. It's
there'll
bad.
probably be
It's
a
bad.
few people that would read something like that. For
Yeah,
most part, I think that would be a lot very boring to people. But showing how history affects somebody's attitude and maybe the way they respond to finding out a piece of information, or they respond to their colonizers, or this, that, or the other, um, that makes it really interesting to me.
yeah. No, I think that's very fair. And actually that's just as a giveaway, that's actually my fantasy. That's one thing that I actually did and kind of changed after your and Herman's interview is I had these two I started to come up with these two groups in ancient times, and it's been at least like 1,000 years since they fought or whatever, but then you still have some descendants from them, and all of a sudden you have all of these things that were distorted from same thing, right? Like distorted from
Mhm.
what they could do. And both sides were just telling like these people are bad because of this, these people are
Yeah.
bad. So they have a lot of animosity still. Everybody does at both groups because they essentially almost wiped out the continent and the world and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just able to come up with a lot of cool popcorny things that just kind of kept going. And all of a sudden I got done and I was like, oh, this isn't really a fantasy anymore. Like this is like a pretty in-depth high fantasy series that I could
Yeah.
keep going back to and adding stuff. So yeah, I totally get what you're saying, and that's like literally how myths are created, right? Or even
Yeah.
prejudices, right? Is that there's that long layer of sociology that is attributed there. So I think that makes total sense, and it's cool because you got a lot of historical repercussions and things that actually happen. I have kids all the time. They're like, when am I going to use this stuff? I'm like, well, if you're going to be a writer, you're going to use it all the time,
Yeah.
depending on your genre and stuff like that. So one kid's like, oh, I'll just be a fantasy writer then. I'm like, good. Don't forget to quote me in your plaque, when you win, a Gimel Award or something like
Well,
that.
now we have more competition. Good job.
I know, right? It's
No,
funny.
but people ask questions like that, like, how did you do this, that, the other? Like, all of us are writers, we're just geeking out about things and telling ourselves stories and playing around. And we'll say, like, it's been 1,000 years or so. But I bet you know exactly how many years it's been. Like, you play it off like you're
It's
not
true.
as much of a nerd about your book as you
It is
are,
true.
but you know exactly what it was. Um, and so I've heard somebody say, once your book is published, you no longer own that story. Pretty much all you are is a really informed reader.
Mm,
And I 100% agree on that. We're just
that's fair.
really well informed readers. Like we know our worlds. And so the way that they come to be is we just play around with enough stuff and whatever sticks on the wall sticks.
Yep.
Um, it's not as complicated and fun as they answer, but like we make shit up.
Yeah, yeah. We're kind of like a caretaker, right? Like, look at George
Yeah.
Lucas. Like, I'm sure he never thought that, like he used to be able to control everything. There used to be this Yoda card, right, from the 90s Star Wars cards, and it was like a foil, and they had a bunch of Yodas on there. And he's like, whoa. And everything used to pass his desk. And he's like, wait a minute. Because I never said there was more than one. That was before Phantom Menace came out with Yaddle, which I thought was interesting. And then he goes, no, no, no. And so that card, a couple of them actually went out, and they're like holy grail cards
Oh,
for
really?
Star Wars merchandise. Yeah, a couple got by through the company and stuff. And there weren't that many. I think it was like 100 or something like that. So yeah, they're like really valuable. But then later on, Yaddle came out, and so some people were like, maybe that's where he got the idea from. And then of course now we got Baby Grogu and stuff.
Yeah.
But I always find that interesting. But look at now, I'm sure that he's like he was just like the caretaker, like sure he created it, but now so many people created so many cool stories and things and games and yeah, that's the dream, right? Is to create something that people love so much that they, want to create
Yeah,
more, spend their lives creating more and adding to it. I mean, Dragonlance is another one, Forgotten Realms, I think is so cool.
yeah,
Because there's so many different people that have done that. So I agree with, I think after a while, if it's people enjoy it enough, right? You're just like a caretaker, you know, you're
yeah.
like the parent and that's about it. So yeah.
And there will be people who misinterpret things within any story, and at the end of the day, that's their interpretation. Like
Yep.
they have as much right to read the story that way as you have to read it another way. And so I don't spend time trying to correct readers on my point of view of what I wrote. Like the words will say something different to every reader in a different way, and that's fine.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool. Yeah, that's really neat. Yeah, I totally agree with you there. That's a cool concept. I never really thought about that. They kind of be like a caretaker of your work, or
Yeah.
you just kind of let it fly like a butterfly after a while. And
Yeah.
uh, yeah, that's really interesting. Interesting thing to think about. So I'm really curious, who was your favorite character to write and why?
I think it changes from book to book.
Sure.
Um, I would say overarching throughout the series is Wall. Uh, Wall is a character who doesn't show up a whole lot in book one. We see him a little bit at the beginning, a little bit at the end. But he ends up, and I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but he ends up being a little bit more significant of a part. I think the reason why I like writing Wall is he's very snarky, so he's fun to play with the banter. But he
Yeah.
also has a really interesting character arc and story where he's dealing with a lot of things under that snarky bravado.
Mm.
And I think he's just a very interesting and complex character that so many different things come out about. And I think in the book two, he became a very complex character, and I think he's only going to expand that complexity in book three. So he's really interesting to write. Um, but I mean, somebody is a lot of people will say like a character's an author stand-in, that they're just basically a representation of the author on the page. I would say every character is an author stand-in. Like every
Yeah, yeah,
character has a piece of me. Um, if Kalo is anything, he's my insecurities. And
oh,
so it is very interesting and cathartic to write Kalo sometimes. I think he is as complex as he is because I understand his point of view and his insecurities. I have not gone through life feeling like I'm the villain of my own people's story, but there are aspects of my life where I can go, I know that feeling of seeing yourself as the bad guy and trying not to be that, or trying not to be a legacy, or trying not to be whatever it is that you have put on yourself.
yeah, yeah.
And so I know that feeling and I've imbued it into this character. So he's really interesting to write just because there are a lot of things that I think I've given to Kalo that he kind of has to figure his way through. And he's also the majority of the POV. So you get to spend a lot of time in his head. So if I didn't like writing him, that would be a problem.
Yeah, yeah. People probably start to feel it after a while.
Yeah,
Definitely go flow onto the page, right? It's
yeah.
so funny. I was up in my head. I was thinking when you said that you didn't feel yourself as the villain your people. I was laughing to myself because I was like, you must not be a teacher.
I actually did teach for a while.
Oh,
Um,
okay. It's so
yeah,
funny. Hey, there was a meme that popped up recently that made me think of that. That's why I said that. It's so funny because, um, but it's interesting, right? Is I think at some point all of us have felt that, right? Like I think everybody can feel that way, right? It could even be like a couple kids I had a few years ago, right? Where they were both being mean to each other. They were both the villain in each other's story, And then they're like,
mhm,
"Oh, I didn't actually know that, that you hadn't done this or that." Like, really, there was nothing. Then they became best friends. But I just find it interesting. My friend had just said something I work with recently about that. That like you're somebody's favorite teacher, but you're always also someone else's least favorite teacher.
yeah.
So when you said that, it just like made me chuckle because I'm thinking like, oh, we just talked about that. That was kind of like something, that really strive to make sure, that we're not the villain of somebody's story. I'm sure I'm somebody's favorite coach. I'm somebody's least favorite coach,
Yeah.
So I think at some point, that's something that, anybody, I think, can connect with there. So maybe that's why, people are connecting with that character. I'm just curious, what did you teach?
So I taught math and social studies to sixth
Oh,
and seventh
cool.
graders.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
I was
I
not great
taught
at it.
don't know if anybody is, buddy. I taught middle school for a long time now. I'm doing high school, and I gotta say, I do miss my middle schoolers, and sometimes they're much more well behaved than my high schoolers. Sometimes even the seniors. But yeah, it's not an easy couple of ages
Yeah.
to teach. Definitely important, but yeah, I got to share a lot of books and authors and stuff, and to this day I have kids email me. I actually had one kid I actually gave Orson Scott Card to, Ender's
Okay.
Game, and then he went. I actually have the copy still. I kept it. He messaged me last year on Facebook. Now he just graduated this year from ASU.
Nice.
First member of his family to ever go to college, first member to ever graduate, and he was like, "It's all because you gave me Ender's Game." So if I never have any other successes as an educator, I feel like I can just hang my hat on that one. And I just thought it was so cool because I love that book.
Yeah.
Um, it's like, yeah, I tore through the whole series. So Orson Scott Card, great job there. But yeah, it's just such an interesting thing to think about. But I always love asking that because people are like, "Who's your favorite kid?" And that's usually, you know, it's hard, right? But
Mhm.
yeah, I agree with you. If you didn't like your main character, right, like people would be able to feel that. It's fine to like writing a character, right, when they do something
Yeah.
crappy, but like you have fun, right? And then I think the villainy part or maybe they're just a crappy person, right? Like that part's fun and stuff. But if you don't enjoy writing that character, I definitely feel like, it flows onto the page, and people can just
Yeah.
can tell. So yeah, totally.
I think I've read some books where I've like this author didn't want to write this or
Yeah.
gave up loving this book halfway through the
Yeah.
process.
Yep.
And you can definitely see that. Um, I am under no delusions that my books are perfect, but I love them. Like I believe in the story that I'm writing. I really think it's a great story. It's gonna connect with some people and other people are not gonna like it. That's okay with me, but I still love these stories. And so if I didn't, I wouldn't be, emailing you or messaging you to try to get on a podcast. I wouldn't be hawking them. Um, I believe there's value in reading what I have to write. And I think most authors do too, but I think there are some authors who aren't in love with their stories anymore. And you
You
can
can
really
feel
read
it.
that.
Yep. Yep. I don't want to point out fingers, but yeah, some people that I got done recently, I was like, people like, how did it go? I was like, oh man. I'm like, if I didn't read with my buddy for book club, I would have stopped at book two. Like let alone book 3, 4, and 5, and I've
Yeah,
seen people say that. I don't want to ostracize anybody, but there's an epic fantasy author. There's many of them, right? But there's one that I was in a group with recently, and they were like, yeah, you could tell, like, after that, he was just trying to continue to make money and stuff. They're like after book 5 or whatever, I feel like there's many that you could say that for, right? But and I was like, I don't know. I was like, I read some of the later stuff and I thought it was really good, and some of the newer stuff from that person turned out to be really good. So, but there's definitely times, right, where you're just like, oh man, but that's where I always like to cultivate different worlds or different things or
yeah,
genres. People are like, why are you going to do urban fantasy first and then do dark fantasy or whatever? I'm like, well, some stuff takes more time. I'm like, or whatever. But I was like, I like to do multiple because then I don't get bored. Like if I can get two characters or series going in two different genres, at the same time a rapid release, I feel like I won't get as bogged down, things like that. Plus, I just sometimes I get writer's block from one
mm,
character or genre, and I'll just switch to the other one, and it actually keeps me going because then I'm
yeah,
flowing and writing, and then I flip over, and even if I'm hopping, I'm inching. Versus right now, I've had to take a break for the last 3 weeks. I haven't gotten too much done. So somebody has to write every day.
yeah.
Even if it's just a few minutes in a project, and then other times, I don't know. It's pretty bad at this point in the year because I'm just like, how it is with school, just like trying to get
Yeah.
done and stuff. But I can't wait for the summer and get some more time. That was a great answer. That was probably one of the better ones.
The
I
other
mean,
ones
no
haven't
offense
been
to
that
anybody.
good. That's okay.
Yeah. Well, no, they were good, but I like that answer. Because I mean, you make a good point, right, about authors who, are kind of over their characters or over the stories.
Yeah.
So for that last one, do you have any news updates or current projects that you can share with us?
So I'm working on Only a Grave Will Do, book three of Malitu. I am hoping to get that out before the end of the year. Um, After that, I have a few projects that I'm thinking of. There is one series that I'm really interested in that the idea is sparked by the TV show Arcane.
Oh,
I
nice.
loved it, and so I wanted to try to play in that style where there's a lot of magic and political intrigue, but I thought there could be some really interesting things that I could do with characters that are not grimdark, but very manipulative and Machiavellian.
Mm.
And so I wanted to try out something like that. Um, there's a spin-off series in the same world as Malitu that I'm thinking about and seeing how I can make that work. And then there's a novella idea that I'm really interested in. Um, I always have more ideas than I'm going to have time to write.
Oh,
So
amen to that.
you know, I think eventually, after I'm done with this series, I will probably release a book in a series and then go to another series and release a book and jump back and forth a little bit.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
as much as I do love to write in Malitu, the other ideas are just kind of like nipping at the back of my neck,
Yeah, yeah.
and I'm really interested in getting into them. So I don't know. I will be writing for a long time even past when readers are interested in reading them, I will be writing these stories. They might just decorate the back of my wall if
Well, they
nobody's
look
gonna read
good.
them.
Yeah, they look good. They look good.
Yeah, but I'm
That's awesome.
excited. I'm excited for the first trilogy to be out, and for that to be showcased. I think readers are gonna really enjoy book three. There are a lot of loose threads from the first two books that all kind of come together. So I'm excited for them to see how all those things turn out.
Yeah. We'll have to have it back on because it'd be so cool to I always like to check in with people at those different milestones.
Yeah.
Um, because like people like I met Brandon Sanderson when Way of Kings had just come out. And
Okay.
like um I met him at the Poison Pen in Scottsdale. Kevin Hearn had invited him, Patrick Rothfuss, Patrick in the Name of the Wind had just come out. I think it was
Oh
like
yeah.
I think I had trouble getting my copy, honestly. It was just like a couple months, but it was kind of
Yeah.
that slow trickle. So it's so funny. Michael J. Sullivan was there. I think he was on book three. Um, it was funny at the time with him was I actually have a new copy here. Because yeah, like Rise of the Empire, I think was the one I had signed by him, but at the time they didn't have the numbers on them.
Oh yeah.
So I brought book two, not knowing, thinking it was book one. And I was teasing him. I was like, you should put numbers on them. He's like, oh, you brought me book two. I'm like, none of them have numbers on them. I was like, I didn't know. And there wasn't like the order sheet was weird or something. So it
Okay.
was really funny. So I always like to jokingly claim now that he put numbers on because of me because I robbed him the wrong book.
And he didn't
uh,
credit you?
I
How
know, right?
dare he?
One of these days I'm gonna talk to him. I'm gonna bring it up, see if he remembers. But yeah, but it's just so funny, like to see people. Brian McCullen, it was this, Gunpowder Maid series first book
Yeah.
came out. Um, I got it back here behind me, but it's funny to see people. They actually a bunch of the indies there were the people. There was a bunch of people. I mean, I can't remember them all. There was like 13 of them. And it was so cool that Kevin, who was a more established person at the time, and Brandon had just finished, like the Wheel of Time. I think Memory of Light was just about to come out, or like right after that. But it was so cool to see. And he's just such a cool guy. I met
Yeah.
him. He actually like gave me a gift card. He's like, "You're a teacher. You teach English. Here, take this $100 gift card to this used bookstore." Him and his wife always came and dropped everything off, and then they would
Yeah.
shop or whatever. He's like, "Here, buy books for your kids." I mean, just the nicest guy. But I just thought that was so cool, that like all the indie authors and traditional were hanging out. And I didn't know that indie was a thing. And I basically spent all day there. I was there at 9 a.m., got done at like 10:30 p.m., right? I was in the same bookstore three different times all day. And I was just talking to different indie authors, and I just thought, God, this is such a cool community,
Yeah.
just to be a part of. And it has been, it's been really awesome. It's been much better than I thought it was going to be. It's been a lot more fun than I possibly, could have thought it could have been. So I agree with you there. It's like one of my things. I'm like, I just want to publish some stuff and get to go chat with some people and, maybe go to a couple Comic Cons along the way or something like that. But
I want to meet some people in person. So I have
I
not
think
done
you're on my
any in-person
side,
events.
so we should find
Yeah.
something. And Rob Lee is pretty close to you.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, if we could find something that's like the Saratoga Comic Con's a little far for you, I think, but him it's only like 3.5. Me, it's 3.5. That one's really good every year. But yeah, we should definitely try to do something on
That'd be
this side.
great.
That'd be I know like there's people on the West Coast like Sean Crow and a bunch of people get
Yeah.
together at a bunch of stuff, and I know Herman's trying to go over there and stuff. I'm like, man, I want to do something over here. But yeah, I didn't know that. So yeah, I'll have to think about that. Maybe we could find a joint thing to go to or something like that. That'd be really fun. Online's fun, but I think in person
Yeah,
is
it's a
just so
different
much
thing.
better. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Leave the kids with for a couple hours and put the writing brain. I think Sean and a couple people did that, like I said, out west, and all of a sudden I
Yeah.
see a bunch of them, they're like blasting through stuff. I'm like, no wonder. I'm like, that must have been a great, coffee shop vibe that everybody was hitting and stuff. I know Dirk Ashton does that a lot, when
Hmm.
Michael J. Sullivan, they have like their retreat and stuff. With some other authors for like a week or something like that at Michael's and his wife's cabin and stuff. So yeah, well, that's awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to read No Hope for a Thief. I actually had my entire list set, which is why people were asking me about a video, and then I had people that had arcs that asked me. So I've been running through arcs, and then I had
Yeah.
more people ask me. I'm like, "Are you sure you haven't even seen my reviews yet?" So I'm saying that trying to call it my private reading list. So I have No Heart for a Thief on there, which I'm really excited to get to. I think I have like 5 more arcs to get through. I said I get through like finish because
Yeah.
my work is really the thing, right? And they've been all been awesome. I've been really blessed, but yeah, I'm really excited to. You're on my summer reading list, so I'm really excited to get there. So
I'm hoping you enjoy it. I
I'm sure I will.
I never am upset when somebody hasn't read or gotten to my book because of I myself I don't have much time to read anymore. I know you
Yeah,
have a
yeah,
young one, I have two young ones.
yeah.
Like reading time is something I fight for. I
Yep, yep,
listen
yep.
to things more than I am able to actually
Oh,
read
totally.
because it's just no time.
Honestly, there's a reason. Like, I actually talked to some audio narrators about this, and I had one where she was like, "Damn, let's throw all 3 of your prequel novellas into one audio, book, and then you
Yeah.
can split it or put it together." So I'm gonna run that through Kickstarter after I do my first 3 prequel novellas. And I'm just doing them just because, like, I'm trying to figure out the finalities of the rest of the world for myself and stuff.
Hmm.
But the main character, Nathaniel, just keeps telling me this story first. And it's like I was like, well, I could just do like an arc of 3. Um, but yeah, she just made such a good point. I was like, well, it'd be like one book. I can't afford it right now and stuff. Trying to get this other stuff out. She's like, no, actually, if you do all 3, it'd be cheaper. But I just
Yeah.
keep thinking like with just parents, or dads like you and me, like without audiobooks, like I actually have my next credit actually is No Heart for a Thief for Audible because I already bought your other books. So if I do both at the same time, fine. Sometimes I like to read, sometimes, I like to listen. But that's the only way I get through books now is by using my
Yeah.
Audible credit for both. And I feel like it's helpful because then I just bought 2 of your products,
Yeah.
and it helps me out because I can actually read them. So,
The
but
issue is I still
without
have to
that,
make an audiobook.
I know, right? Oh, that's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Dang it, that's why I didn't do it last month. I totally forgot about that. But
Yeah.
that's where I'm like, I was listening to her and I'm like, that's such a good idea because I'm like, I know so many people, because like JCM Byrne, he has Wistful Ascending for the audiobook, but then hasn't done, the next 2 because they're expensive, right?
They are.
But I thought even if I just did my own, or something, like just so that people could at least listen to the story, like, you and me.
Mhm.
'Cause it's just so hard, yeah, when you have little ones and you're trying to write and stuff. But to me, it just made having a kid just made the audio market just look so much different and more
Yeah.
appealing, if you know what I mean. But yeah, it is expensive. I was thinking about just doing like Kickstarter next year for both, because Zeus Diamante, he did that right with his
Mhm.
recent Kickstarter, and it was just like in this other set. So I thought that that's really smart to do, and just put it all. So I might just put everything together in one Kickstarter or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, definitely something to think about. Right, my friend. Well, that was really awesome. I just want to
Yeah,
remind our crowd, to check out James's books. They're going to be in the description anywhere where you're watching or listening. And then once you're done, don't forget to review. Like I said, Audible. I always review everything on Audible. A lot of people forget that you can do that, but it helps out not just James, but our voice actors, artists, things like that. So, just make sure that, you're reviewing the products anywhere where any of our creators or authors are, and that helps everybody in the creative process. James, thank you so much for reaching out, my friend. This was
yeah.
awesome. I
It
look
was a
forward
pleasure, man.
to, yeah, I look forward to having you back in the future and, kind of seeing where you're at, for, this set of books and, also your future plans as well. But, yeah, if you need anything in the meantime, just hit me up and we'll share anything in the podcast group. You can always go in there and, do it
Yeah.
yourself, or you can send it to me and we'll get everything, including book three, out there as much as possible. But yeah, if you need anything else, just email me. But other than that, I'll talk to you on social media, my friend.
All right, cool. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, not a problem. Have a good rest of the day.
You too.
See ya.
Bye.